Okay. Thank you so much for having me today, everyone. I'm so happy to be here and to be able to share with you a little bit about my world and what I do in my work with folks who have migraine. And so today I'm going to be talking a little bit about thriving with migraine, attempting to make friend out of foe. And in this first slide, I really love that whole analogy of, being a dandelion trying to grow in the midst of a concrete jungle, because I feel like this is so much of, my patients' stories is, trying to learn how to thrive, to learn how to grow despite some pretty difficult and demanding circumstances. And I certainly think that the year 2020 is no exception. So to start off, migraine, it's the guest that you never invited to the party, right? And most of my patients that come to see me, a lot of them have some similar threads in their story. And one of those threads is, I have done everything. I've done everything I can to try to get rid of this, to try to, make sure that it doesn't somehow overhaul and take over my life, but somehow in the process, it has. And so for many folks that I see, they describe that they live a maybe life, So I'm hoping that I'll be able to get to that party or to that picnic or to my son's soccer game, but it kind of depends on what happens that day, how I feel, what the migraine decides. So as a result, they feel disconnected from others. They feel disconnected from their friends or their family. They feel disconnected from the things that matter to them. They'll describe, some of their goals in life have been a bit derailed. So they'll say, my academic pursuits have been put on hold, or I've had to adjust them. I've had to pass on a promotion because I just don't know if I can deal with the extra demands that come with that. And as a result of some of those changes, there's a shift in perception. And what I mean by that is people have a shift in how they may see themselves, how they see themselves as capable or incapable of doing things, how they see their abilities to sculpt their own future, and their ability to say, hey, if a demand comes upon me, can I handle it? Can I deal with it? And they may notice that their sense of resiliency may be impacted. And over time, that can sometimes mean that they get stuck. So they may notice some more longer term drifting away from goals that really mattered to them. There's a shift in how, again, they see themselves and self acceptance. So a lot of times when I'm working with folks, they'll say, I don't really like who I am anymore. I don't like how people may see me. I don't like that these headaches sometimes call the shots in my life when I never asked them to. And I think I'm a pretty good person, and somehow karma has given me this, and I don't know why. I also see increases in depression and anxiety. And that's actually a fairly common issue in those with migraine. Depression runs at about 25% of those who have migraine, and anxiety can occur in up to 50%. And these are over double the national averages for depression and anxiety. And isolation. I've had patients say, if someone tells me one more time that it's just a headache, and why don't I just, take some Excedrin, I think I'm going to scream. And they just find that a lot of people in their lives don't understand. They don't get what migraine really means. And as a result, they feel more isolated, not just because maybe sometimes they're living that maybe life, but also because people just don't get it. So glad we could start on a high note here. But there goes my timer. So I wanted to say, though, that there are ways to make changes to that. And a lot of times that starts with trying to make friends with that unwanted guest, being migraine. And there's a quote from Rumi that I really like that says, the cure for pain is in the pain. And sometimes when I bring that up to people, they kind of look at me and they roll their eyes and they're like, really? That's your answer to all this? And what I tell them is that, it's not that we can necessarily always run from this. We don't have a magic wand. We don't have a magical door number 3 behind which, the cure for migraine exists. I think we're certainly making strides, especially in the past few years with therapeutic treatments, which I'm sure my colleagues will talk about later. But the fact of the matter is there is no omnibus cure for migraine. So we work on how do we deal with the cards that have been dealt. And so we talk about how perceptions of pain and how we manage it actually makes a difference in how it affects us. There's actually quite a bit of neurobiological research that shows that how we see our pain, how we meet our pain in those moments makes a difference in then what our brain does to manage the pain. And so when we think about that, we have to think about what do we have control over and what do we not have control over. And what I tell folks is that, it's really important to understand all the components of coping successfully with migraine. And a lot of that journey actually starts with becoming friends with ourselves, because so many times it's this adversarial sense of it's me versus the migraine, even though the migraine is actually a part of you. And how we see ourselves in that, sometimes that less than light. I'm not as good as I could have been without migraine. I'm not the reliable person I think I should be, the coulda, woulda, shouldas, which always tend to get us tied up. It's important to be able to accept and recognize that, even with our flaws, even with our health issues, we are actually perfect just the way we are. And we have to be able to come to a sense of acceptance with that so that we can do all we can to manage the situation that's at hand. And so when I talk to people about coping, so a lot of times when I get referrals from my neurological colleagues, it'll say, needs help with headache coping, needs help with migraine skills, or, something along those lines. And so when people talk to me about, what's going on in their lives and the things that they're struggling with, and we start to talk about what coping means, I usually go over kind of these 4 broad pieces of coping. So when we think about coping, there's a lot of different pieces and parts to that, each of which could be a talk in and of itself. And so we talk about, coping strategies as it relates to our mind, how we think, how we're able to take care of ourselves and mind how we're appraising situations, how we're thinking about ourselves and how things are going. Coping also includes how do we take care of our bodies? How are we nourishing our bodies through, exercise, eating, hydrating, being able to do things that help to target certain areas that may need more tending. And it also means how do we let go of the stress and relax? And so mind and body are very much connected. And I tell people we have one brain. We don't have a mind brain and a body brain. We have one brain and it all connects. And that also leads to connection, which actually I mean in a slightly different sense. And that is, how do we connect to others? How do we connect to the folks that matter to us? How do we connect to our goals that are meaningful to us? And then strategy is really, how do we get this stuff into our lives? How do we make it happen? Because so many of us understand that, hey, it's probably good to take some deep breaths sometimes. It's probably good to take a walk. It's, yes, I could probably add a few more leafy greens to my diet, but how do I do that in a meaningful way, in a consistent way? So coping involves all of these things, and each of them connect to one another. And so I want to share with you a few things about coping that I just want you to keep in mind when you're figuring out your plan for thriving with migraine. So to start off, I use this analogy. I don't know if you guys have heard this before, but thinking about how heavy is your glass? And basically what this is asking is, how much is your stress load right now? Because depending on what you have going on in your lives, that glass may have, some weight to it or a lot of weight to it. And I would imagine, given where we are in the world right now, many of your glasses probably look like the fuller side. And for those who have a chronic health condition such as migraine, your glass is automatically heavier anyway. And it's a leaded glass and on top of the water of life that flows into it. And so it's so important to recognize, you may be able to hold on to that glass for, a certain amount of time and it doesn't bother you, but the longer you hold it, the heavier it gets. And the fuller it is, the heavier it feels more quickly. And so it's important to check in with yourself each day and ask yourself, how heavy is my glass today? What do I have going on? And how is it affecting me? And so that's something that I really try to reinforce with a lot of my people that I see is, the importance of a self-check, acknowledging, what the effects of stress are on your body, on your well-being, on your mind, how you are managing that, how it is affecting your relationships, and being able to kind of keep that on the radar. It's not meant to bring you down and to only focus on your stress. But I find that a lot of times when people are dealing with pain on a fairly regular basis, they kind of are able to learn how to funnel and try to only focus on what they need to focus on and try to push the rest off. But unfortunately, in that process of trying to survive, we sometimes don't always recognize all those effects that happen on the body. So it's important to check in and also figure out what your emotions are telling you. Where are you? And so sometimes when I do groups, we do a weather check-in. How are you feeling today emotionally through weather? So people say they may feel foggy, they may feel, slightly cloudy with a chance of rain later. They might feel sunny that day. But being able to check in with your emotions is an important part of recognizing how full your glass is and what you may need to do for yourself that day, because we need to all keep ourselves on the radar. And if there's anything that I've learned in all of my work, I find that my folks with migraine tend to be the ones who most struggle with this. They tend to put themselves at the bottom of the list, if at all. They tend to be caregivers. They tend to be those who are very selfless and want to make sure that everyone else is okay. And so sometimes my goal in working with them is just getting their name on the list, even if it's not first on the list, but even, in the middle of the list, I'll take it. And so recognizing what you need. And then another piece is being able to differentiate pain from suffering, because we see both happen with migraine. Pain is a very obvious consequence of migraine that happens, just physiologically. But that's different from the suffering that we experience as a result of pain. And so when people tell me, I'm in pain today, I'll ask them, well, what kind? Because we need to kind of differentiate between pain versus I'm feeling hopeless, I'm feeling desperate, I'm feeling, like I can't see the end of this, this rope bridge. And so, we have to be able to understand that, because emotions, are important to also recognize and manage on top of the pain itself. And so I love this quote from C.S. Lewis, part of every misery is misery's shadow. It's that you don't merely suffer, but have to think about the fact that you suffer. And in Buddhism, there's this thought that, that we all have darts of pain that come at us in life. And the first darts that come at us are usually the ones that are inevitable. Buddhism, is very much into saying, suffering is inevitable. It's just a part of life. And so the migraine itself could be considered a first dart. But the second darts are the ones that we bring upon ourselves. And so when I see folks, they'll say, gosh, when I'm noticing a migraine coming on, I'm like, oh my gosh, really? Again, why today? Why me? I would not wish this on my worst enemy. What is this going to affect? How is this going to derail my life today? And all of those thoughts lead to those second darts, those feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, frustration, anger, sadness. And so we talk about ways to manage first darts without then piercing ourselves again with a second dart. So successful coping, we talk about it in a few different domains. And so all things I am sure you guys know, but never hurts to hear again, and maybe in a slightly different voice. So prioritizing self-care, and especially right now, I think so many of us have daily structures that have kind of gone out the window because of everything that's been going on with the pandemic, and it's turned all of our lives upside down. And so being able to have some sort of daily structure in place helps our brains to stay calmer because we don't always have to think about what's coming next. Healthy habits, as you know, trying to get fresh air each day, trying to do things that are important and goal oriented and matter to you. But one thing that I think sometimes falls off the radar is integration of fun. We so often say, okay, I have to get ABC done because, those are the important things, because if they don't get done, something falls off the wagon, something doesn't happen. But we don't always recognize that fun is necessary. We need that in order to thrive. We need that in order to stay creative, in order to stay balanced. And so, whatever that may be, I just ask that it be completely selfish. We always steer away from that word selfishness, like it's bad. But sometimes we need to be selfish in order to take care of ourselves. And sometimes fun things are selfish. You know, if you do something that's completely for you, it may not benefit anyone else, but that doesn't mean that it isn't important. And so if that means that, you go for a walk just by yourself and it has nothing to do with anyone else, but it feels good for you because it helps you to center, great. Please, in that way, be selfish. And then it's also important to maintain a compassionate attitude, being able, and I mean that towards yourself. Again, we're oftentimes very good at being compassionate towards others, but we need to be compassionate towards ourselves because some days are going to be better than others. Some days your glass is going to be fuller than others. And some days, you may have to work twice as hard to do half as much. And that's okay. And it's important to recognize that it's okay. Successful coping means focusing on areas that you actually have control over. There are many things in this world right now that none of us have control over. And I think that when we get wrapped up in that, whether it's, comments we see on social media or things that are happening in politics or, the world at large, we get very anxious and we get very focused on things that we don't have control over. So it's important to focus on those things that we have control over, not just the rudimentary health behavior type things, eating, hydration, but also how we talk to ourselves. That constant ticker tape matters. It frames how we see the world and what we do. And it then in turn changes what our external response will be to the world and the people around us. And it's also important to think about how you're exposing yourself to the world. And by that, I mean, how much time are you spending on social media, news, 24-hour news cycles? I've been prescribing to a lot of my patients recently 20 minutes a day. More than 20 minutes, and you are going to set yourself up for a likely worsening depression of all the constant news that really doesn't change after the first 20 minutes you watch it. It just, goes on repeat. So 20 minutes a day of news or less. And then being present-minded. So making sure that you take time to connect to yourself, breathe. We breathe every day, but sometimes not to our own benefit. And being able to take a moment to connect to your breath. My daughter's learning about mindful breathing in school right now, and she calls it her anchor breath. And she will do it at home, and I love it to see her do it because it helps to really get her refocused on whatever she's doing. We all could use that sometimes. And sometimes it also means connecting to something else. We all think mindfulness means you have to be on a lily pad somewhere, meditating and zenning out. But really, it just means connecting to what's right in front of you, connecting to your senses, sense of touch, sense of smell, sense of, your hearing, connecting to that environment. And also maybe connecting to others and being fully present for a conversation rather than thinking about what you're going to say in response to what they just said. And utilizing available supports. We all need to lean on each other. We are not, biologically constructed to be independent individuals from one another. We're pack animals. We are meant to rely on one another. And I think we forget that sometimes. And so it's important to remember, who are your instrumental supports? The folks who'll, run to the grocery store if you can't get there that day. The folks who, pick up your kids if you need some help. Who's there to listen and not offer, what you should do and advice? Who will just listen and say, gosh, it sounds like you had a really sucky day today. I am so sorry, but I'm here to be a shoulder. We all need that. And then recognizing who your professional supports are, whether it's your neurologist, your therapist, your physical therapist, whoever it may be, but recognizing that those folks are there. And even in the midst of a pandemic, we will still see you, and we are very busy with seeing people. So know that we are here always. And then lastly, thinking about strategy, what can you do to make one small step at a time towards any new coping strategy or something that maybe has fallen off your list? What can you do to take one step towards that? Whether it's, I'm going to, every time my Apple Watch says to breathe, which, mine does multiple times a day, you actually use it and maybe actually, do what it tells you to once in a while. Or, before I go to bed at night, I'm going to wind down with a nice cup of herbal tea because that kind of gets me set for going to sleep. And then it's important to, reflect on successes and difficulties with acceptance and compassion. Some days are better than others. Some days we do really well, and other days, there are things that we can learn from, but that's part of being human. And we don't have to be perfect in anything because that's not how we're made. And I really like this quote that, your failures make your successes so much more meaningful. And so, it's part of that process of learning and part of, sometimes stumbling over new coping strategies or things that you want to incorporate that then makes it more successful in the long run. And so recognize that, wherever you are is where you're supposed to be right now. And we just start from there. So be kind to yourself. And if there's anything that I've been trying to send a message to folks about this year, it's to be kind because of everything that's been going on, because of everything that has gone wrong this year. Be kind to yourself and to others. And I think we could all use a little bit more of that in this world. And if we just add 5% of that into our attitude, I feel like the world would be so much better place. So that's my challenge to you guys today, and starting to become a friend to yourself. And that's all I have. And my timer went kaput, so I don't know where I am on time, but I'm happy to answer questions.
You're right on time.
Oh my gosh, that never happens. All right.
Thank you very much. Let me get to, and I'm trying to get to the view where I can see questions. Well, first of all, that was wonderful. And one thing that I have heard a lot in my support groups is I feel like everybody needs someone like you to talk to. And that not only is there stigma behind migraine, I feel like there's stigma behind saying I need someone to talk to, right? I don't know, when people say they need to come talk to you, is there stigma behind that as well?
I think for some, when they're not entirely sure why, because sometimes it's the neurologist who says, I think you could use someone to talk to. And they're kind of, many patients that I see, they've never seen a psychologist before. I'm the first point of contact for many, many referrals. And so we talk about that, and they're like, yeah, I think my neurologist says, that I need to talk to you. So I'm guessing they think I'm crazy. And I'm like, well, you're in luck because I don't see crazy people. So, that's a first step. You're in the right place. And we work on that and we talk about those things. And so for some, they're very hesitant at first because, they're not sure what that means to have to see a psychologist, when all it means is that you're using all the tools that are at your disposal. It means that you're being successful and resilient in coming to terms with, all the stuff that's going on, and you're strong enough to face it and move forward.
Absolutely. I love how you put everything together. A question here is, how do you find a psychologist like you that knows about migraine? Because that's really hard. Not a lot of people understand it, and you definitely do.
It's I will admit fully that it is hard. And what I would say is that even if you cannot find someone who has a specialty in migraine, because I only know of, a handful, even just here in Ohio. Even if you cannot see someone who has a specialty in migraine, if you can find someone that you feel like you can talk to and can share your experience with, and you feel like they can understand you at least as you as a person, because every person with migraine is different. It's like a fingerprint. How it affects everyone is very different. And so while, yes, in an ideal world, it would be great for someone who has that background. But if you can find someone that you think actually hears you and you trust them, that is the most important factor in any therapeutic relationship. It doesn't matter what their background is, what their training is. If you feel like you can connect to that person, that's what matters.
Okay, great. Thank you. Oh, is your practice opened to clients outside of your geographical area via telemedicine appointments?
I do virtual visits. And it depends on the state. Psychology has a lot of interesting rules when it comes to interstate jurisdictions. So some states I am allowed to practice under pandemic law right now. Others are very strict. So it depends on the state. But if they're in Ohio, no problem at all.
Okay. Um, finding a psychologist that focuses on migraine and pain, do you think that, like you said, there's not a lot of them, but maybe a neurologist would be hopefully a first step in finding that you have a relationship?
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. They would be the first best step. And then sometimes the neurologist will reach out to me, and I can sometimes help get people coordinated to other care that's local to them.
Okay, great. Thank you. Do you have ideas on how to lower the water in your glass if you realize it's too full?
Yes. And so that's where I think some of those various types of coping strategies come in. And for some, they may already have a great meditation practice in place, but they have a really hard time saying no to things. And they may need to learn how to be able to yeah, I know, right? I think we're all guilty of that. So how do you take some things off your plate so that you're not trying to manage the entire world on a plate this big? For others, it's, I really don't spend any time on myself or do relaxation techniques or, connect with others. And so kind of doing a self inventory and figuring out what is it that you need to do in order to feed yourself. What is going to be important in those different domains? Because again, it varies depending on the person. So I'd say start with where are you and what is least likely to get attention right now in terms of your self-care, and start there.
Perfect. And I also, I mean, one of my suggestions is keeping a journal or a daily list or something. I have my list every day, or sometimes I have it for the week, and then I'll put a day next to those things to try to help myself not feel overwhelmed.
Spread it out a little. Yep. And I would say on those to-do lists, add your self-care items. Don't let it just be the things you have to do, the things that you need to do for you. Put them on the list, put them on the calendar so that they become part of your schedule as anything else.
That's a great idea because I don't put those things on. Great idea. Let me see. Suggested tools to get out of the suffering shadow.
That's a good one. So I would start with, even a small mindfulness practice, because mindfulness is all about being able to be with what's going on in the moment and teasing that apart from the suffering and being able to recognize the difference. And so being able to be with yourself, and whether it's a formal meditation practice like breathing or body scan or acceptance-based meditations, or linking to your environment, but what that does is it helps train the part of your brain that's meant to help with focused attention and being able to focus on those things of importance rather than the things that are screaming the loudest.
Great tip. And just to follow up with that, as I said, we do mindfulness events, and they're going to be 3 Thursdays in December. And I was mistaken. You do need to sign up for those. But mindfulness, I really didn't understand what it was. And I thought it was, you had to, I just thought it was like some big deal type thing. And until we started doing mindfulness events, it really isn't there. It's simple, and you really do, just, I kind of unload when I participate in our mindfulness events, and it teaches you how to do it on your own. So just following up what Dr. Rush said is, if you want to try it, there's definitely apps on your phone to try it, but practicing it with Miles for Migraine, it's free. Come on and try it, and you might find that it's easy and it's different than you thought it was. So it's something you can try. Even we do art therapy, and I was like, art therapy, what's that? And it's fun, and you just get into this little space that you didn't realize there was, right? And that's kind of what you want to
Exactly.
do.
You
Get
get to
rid of
shed
everything
that
else.
coat of armor,
Yeah,
and you
yeah,
just get to be with yourself and whatever that thing is right in front of you. And it's such a weight lifted, and it's a way to put that glass down. Even if we can't empty the glass or make it lighter, you get to put it down for a minute, and it makes all the difference in your long-term stamina and your well-being. It's a very empowering tool.
100%. So thank you so much. Your presentation was wonderful. We
Oh,
thank you.
thank you for having me.
Absolutely.